Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Lausanesiris, and this is my YouTube channel, grecochess. We're continuing the series about the chess tournament grecochess that is taking place in chess.com. 16 players are competing for the title of the first grecochess champion. In the previous video, we shared the general rules and the participants, but we have the first few games that have been completed. We're going to show to you the information. As you see in the screen, 10 games have been completed, but unfortunately out of them 4 are timeouts. What does this mean? In 4 games, one player did not reply within the 3 days time period they had, so they lost by default. Another 4 games ended up in early resignation, meaning one of the players resigned their first 2-3 moves. And I really would like to ask all of you, whether in this tournament or in any other tournament or game, please don't do it. In this tournament in particular, the first 16 players that wanted to participate were selected, and other players were left because they were a little bit too late. So please, if you're not serious about it and you're going to time out or withdraw without really playing the game, please don't do it. Don't log in. That's what I'd like to ask you. But we have 2 games that went all the way until the end, very exciting ones, and I'm going to show them to you. They are from Group 2 of Andrea Mart versus Boris Alexandrovich Peasants. And both of them completed. In one game, Andrea was with white, in the other, Boris was with white. And let's give a look first at the game where Andrea had the white pieces. We're going to do the review. And Andrea is from Italy and Boris is from the United States. Let's see what happened. Andrea starts with a d pawn. For the first few moves, we're going to have book moves. Knight to f6 is also book move for Boris. And let me change my the video of me, so you can see easily the comments that are written. I'm going fast through the book moves. As you see in the review, things go okay until move 7 white, with knight going to h3 book move. And after the first 7 moves, in fact, the white 7 move, where white has played 7 moves and black has played 6 moves, we're following book. And white has a small advantage, 0.47, just because it started first. And the comment for white 7 move is out comes the knight, helping to solidify the position. Let's see how black will respond. We're not in book any longer. The best move according to the computer is pawn goes to c5. Here we are going to see the best moves because this is a review of a game played in chess.com. I'm not entering the moves like I did with my own over-the-board tournament games. It shows it with an arrow. The ideal move according to the computer is pawn goes to c5, but the move going to b6 is good because, among other things, it liberates the bishop at c8. White sends the knight back. White had to send to h3 instead of f3 because there was a pawn at f3. From f2, it controls more squares near the center. And clearly more overall because at the edge, the knight controls of only 4 squares, while from f2, it controls 6 squares. Bishop is developed to e6 for black. White attacks a bishop. And here saves the pawn on c4. Bishop goes back. Here, the computer would like white to start pushing the a pawn. Instead, white perhaps may want to long castle, so sends the queen on d2. Once again, black pushes the e pawn to e6. Computer would rather have the a pawn go to a6. And this seems to be inaccuracy. Bishop goes to a6. Why? Because now black is going to lose the bishop on g7. If they don't, they lose the rook on f8. And perhaps that would give an advantage to white because the black bishop on g7 was controlling the long dark colored diagonal. And also was near the king, being a defense near the king since the g7 pawn had moved to g6. The computer would rather have white exchange the bishops now that the bishop went to h6. And now it's now or never for white because if they don't take another bishop, the bishop can hide in h8 since there is no rook on f8 any longer. No, white does not exchange, instead does the long castling. And yes, black sends bishop to h8. The computer says avoiding the trade was the smart choice here. Yes, it was, because black has still a bishop in the diagonal that goes from a1 to h8. This is one of the two big long diagonals. It's 8 squares long. The other one is from h1 to a8. And it's nice if you can have a bishop to control it. Also, the king has some good defense, because otherwise the g7 square is very, very weak. White starts attacking the g-pawn. We exchange on c6. Now black controls both long diagonals. The other one from a8 to h1 is controlled by the bishop on c6. So black has an advantage of controlling the two long diagonals. In fact, the computer gives an advantage of 0.18 for black. White despairs. They cannot take the dark colored black bishop, so bishop goes back to e3. Pawn goes down. Black controls more space and perhaps maybe, not to say lucky, but get more advantage by exchanges. And also they threaten a fork on d4. If the pawn goes to d4, if black would play again, it is stacked 3 times by bishop, queen, and rook, defended only once by the queen. So it's not exactly a threat for a fork, but it could happen. White attacks the knight. Knight go back to d7. And let's see what it do. White exchange their bishop for the knight on b6. Even though the computer would rather have the knight go to g4. If it goes to g4, the knight perhaps can go to h6 and check. Computer doesn't like it. Usually a bishop is a little bit better than a knight. And now the white knight takes a pawn, but this seems to be a mistake. Let's see why. Will black see it? Nope. Could that be a mouse slip? I have no idea, but no, I don't think it is, because if the queen would take the knight instead of stopping at d6, it would also be lost. Ideally, the computer would rather have the bishop take the knight. Let's see what would happen. If bishop takes a knight, then pawn takes the bishop, and then we start a series of exchanges where black would be at least a pawn up. Plus, more important than the extra pawn is the white king is very exposed now. But black, instead of taking advantage, blunders the queen. Let's see how. Yes, knight goes to f6. Black is in a tough position because the queen cannot take the knight. There's a pawn on g5 to take the queen. What can black do? If they leave the queen on d6, it will be lost by the queen. What else can it do? king can go to f8 g7. Again, the queen is lost. The minimum damage, as they say, would be for the queen to take the knight, because at least they lose the queen for a knight and not for free. Let's see what happened. Nope. And now white takes an entire queen. White is very much ahead, 6.47. Black sends the king to g7 to hide it, but this is going to result to a check. White takes the rook on e8, checks, and they have an advantage of 6.69. At this point, Black, that is Boris Alexandrovich Peasants, resigns, and Andrea March wins the game. That is what happened in the first of the two games played between them. Let's go now. We're going to see the various categories. What does the computer think about this game? The computer thinks that Andrea played with 83.4 accuracy and Boris 76.9. Andrea had one great move. Both of them had five best moves. Excellent. 3 for 1 for Boris. Good 3 for 1 for Boris. Book 7 for 6 Andrea. Andrea had 5 inaccuracies. Boris had 1. Uh, Andrea had 2 mistakes and Boris had 2. And blunders, Boris had 1. I believe it is a blunder where Boris allowed Andrea to win the queen. And they played as if their ratings was 1650 for Andrea and 1300 for Boris. And this concludes the first game where Andrea had the white. Let's see what happens at the other game where Boris had the white. Here Boris has a white and Andrea has a black pieces. And we're going to do the game review. Start the review. And now Boris starts with the pawn to e4. Once again, the first few book moves. I'm not going to talk too much about them. The Sicilian defense. This is standard Sicilian defense theory until now. Myself, I face it many times. And now we finally leave book. After 6 moves for both sides, when the black pawn goes to e5 and attacks the knight on d4. This is the 6th move of black. We're still in the book, but the knight goes to 3. The computer would rather have the knight go to e2, but I understand to f3. It gives more space to the queen. The knight on f3 controls 2 central squares and 8 squares totally instead of 1 and 6 if it was in 2. And at this point, the computer thinks that both sides are equal. Let's see how was it before that move. Before that move, while we're still in book, computer thinks that white has a 0.32, a small advantage, mostly because it started first. But after this, to my opinion, reasonable move, they are equal. Black wants basically to stop anything going to g5, whether a knight or a bishop from white. Castling for white. Both sides develop their bishops. The computer doesn't like the attack to b5. Would rather have the bishop go to e7. I think the reasons are because black has not finished the development, and by pushing the pawn on b5, they open the diagonal from h1 to a8. If white could put a bishop, they would attack the rook. And at this point, yes, if instead of this pawn, the bishop could safely go there, then the rook is attacked, has nowhere to go. If it goes to e7, it will be taken by the other bishop. And white stops any potential of an attack. Black perhaps was dreaming, move the pawn on before the knight on c3 has to move, then the pawn on e4 is less protected. It's protected now only by the bishop and not by the knight. But white stops it. And after the end of 10 moves, white has a small advantage of 1.07. After the quote-unquote good move, queen going to c7. Continue a few moves, basically development, taking more space. Still, both sides are more or less equal. Now white makes a mistake. I think the black can easily take the pawn on a3. Let's see what will happen. Nope. Oh, if the knight could, excuse me, black could win a pawn on a3, but instead they move their bishop on e7, and computer prefers that. The a principle being better develop your pieces and control more space than just take a pawn here and there. Now the computer would rather have black with a pawn on a3 because the development is more or less completed. We completed 16 moves and computer gives black an advantage of 2.21. Now it becomes 3.28 after 17 moves. Once again, computer wants black to take the pawn on a3. The problem is if they do it, of course, the knight on a2 has nowhere to go, but if they could go somewhere, then the knight on a3 would be in danger. And black blunders. They place the queen on c3. Until now, they had black an advantage of 232, and suddenly they're down 529. Because the knight from a2 can take the queen on c3. Let's see what will happen. Yes, white took it, and white is 529 ahead. This is quite a significant advantage. Of course, it's not, as they call it, insurmountable. There is a possibility that black can end up winning the game, but white, if you play carefully, don't make any mistakes, the game is theirs. As I say, it is there to lose. We continue now. Both sides play reasonable moves. Advantage is about 5 pawns for white. Of course, white wants to exchange pieces because they're up by almost a queen. Yep. And white also controls the open C file with their queen. We're approaching the end. It goes so fast, slow. Pawn in f5 is attacked twice by white, but the queen and bishop protected only by the bishop. And black finds a way to save it by pushing the pawn to e4. And white is going to lose the knight. Yes, it was attacked, but they had other squares to put it. They could have placed it, let's see. d4, not a good one. e5, nope. g5, nope. h4, at least it's not going to be taken, although if it's attacked once again, could go to g6. Well, better than nothing, h4, but not really good square on the edge of the board. Can go to g1, as the computer suggests. Can go to e1, why not? And can go to d2. But he sent it to d4, where black is going to capture it, play knight, and that is why white's advantage is going to decrease a little bit. Now it's 428. White pushes the pawn to f3. I think what they want to do is they want to make sure that the e4 does not end up winning. But they needed a pass pawn, not yet. If black had moved it to e3, so they take the pawn on f3, white takes back. White tries to advance the king because near the end the king becomes an active piece. And white pushes the king to d3. Black moves pawn to g6. And king for white goes to d4. And suddenly, from 524 for white. It becomes, you see what it is here, M1, meaning black has a mate in 1, but will they see it? Yes, they saw it, and out of nowhere, black takes the win. 2 wins for Andrea. The second one, especially the second one, was spectacular because after Andrea had blunted the queen and was down a queen, one careless move for white from Boris, and that's all that Andrea needed to bring the bishop to f5 and checkmate. The king is in the middle of the board, has nowhere to go. Of course, the bishop cannot be taken. Since it is next to the king, nothing can go between them. And for the king, all 8 squares around it, 2 are covered by their own pawns, and the other 6 are not safe. Either the pawns defend the bishops, or these 2 squares, the bishop attack, and here the pawn attacks. And that concludes the first 2 games that have been completed other than the timeouts and the early resignations. Congratulations to Andrea for winning this game and obtaining these 2 points. Let's go back to the tournament. As you see here, in the first group, no game has been completed. In the second, Andrea started with 2 wins. In the third, where I participate, no game has been completed. In the fourth one is where we have the timeouts and the early resignations. The tournament continues. Let's see how will things go. Will we have more games completing? Will we have more news to share with you? I'm Harilas Aniziris. This is the grecochess tournament in chess.com. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the viewers, the subscribers, people leaving nice comments. See you later on another video. If we have any game completed by Friday, we're going to show it. Otherwise, on Friday, I'm participating in the Queen's Chess Championship this October, the last, the 5th round, and I'll have the game from there. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my Greco Chess YouTube channel. Goodbye.